Rising Above Ridicule, the inspiring journey of how I turned my brother-in-law's disrespect into unstoppable empowerment. I stood frozen in my sister's marble kitchen, clutching a glass of wine that suddenly felt too heavy in my hands. The birthday party buzzed around me, but Jake's voice cut through everything else like a knife. "Clara's still playing with her little paintbrushes," he announced to the circle of relatives, his laugh echoing off the vaulted ceilings. 30 years old and still thinks she's going to be the next Picasso. The room fell silent for a heartbeat before nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. My cheeks burned as every eye turned toward me, some pitying, others amused. Jake's smirk widened as he delivered the final blow. "Some people never learn that dreams don't pay bills." I forced a smile, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. This wasn't the first time Jake had humiliated me in public, but something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way my own family nodded along, or how my sister Emma avoided my gaze entirely. Whatever it was, a fire ignited in my chest that would soon change everything. Growing up, our family gatherings always followed the same script. Uncle Harold would brag about his son's law practice, Aunt Patricia would show off her daughter's medical degree, and everyone would nod approvingly at these real achievements. Then they'd turn to me with those patronizing smiles, asking about my little art hobby, with the same tone they'd use for a child's finger painting. My parents, God bless them, tried to be supportive, but I could see the worry in their eyes. They wanted me to have stability, security, something tangible. Art wasn't tangible to them. It was risky, unpredictable, impractical. Jake had positioned himself as the family's voice of reason, the successful businessman who'd made something of himself in real estate. He'd married my sister Emma 5 years ago, and somehow convinced everyone that his opinion mattered most. Every family dinner became a platform for his lectures about realistic expectations and growing up. I'd learned to stay quiet, to nod politely when he dismissed my work as cute or a nice distraction. After Jake's birthday speech, I escaped to Emma's guest bathroom, needing a moment to collect myself. When I emerged, I found Emma waiting in the hallway, her expression unreadable. "Clara, we need to talk," she said softly, guiding me toward her home office. I hoped she was going to apologize for her husband's behavior, maybe offer some sisterly support. Instead, she closed the door and sighed heavily. "You know Jake doesn't mean anything by it," she began, her voice tired. "He's just practical. He worries about your future." I stared at her in disbelief. "He humiliated me in front of our entire family," I whispered, my voice shaking. Emma shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "You've always been overly sensitive, Clara. Jake's successful. Maybe you should listen to his advice instead of getting defensive." Her words hit harder than Jake's public mockery. This was my sister, my closest family member, and she was taking his side. I felt something break inside me, a final thread of hope that someone in my family truly believed in me. The next morning, I sat in my tiny studio apartment, staring at a half-finished canvas that suddenly looked pathetic to my eyes. Maybe Jake was right. Maybe I was delusional, clinging to childish dreams while real life passed me by. The knock on my door startled me from my spiral of self-doubt. When I opened it, Mrs. Rodriguez stood there with her warm smile and paint-stained apron. She'd been my art teacher in high school, the one person who'd seen potential in my work when everyone else saw scribbles. "Clara, Misha," she said, stepping inside without invitation. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on my favorite student. She glanced around my apartment, taking in the canvases lining the walls, the easel by the window, the organized chaos of my creative space. Her eyes lit up with genuine excitement. "These are incredible," she breathed, moving closer to examine my recent pieces. "Clara, you've grown so much as an artist. This work has soul, passion, real depth." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of the old confidence, the belief that maybe my art mattered after all. Mrs. Rodriguez's visit gave me enough courage to do something I'd been avoiding for years. The next Sunday dinner, when Jake started his usual routine of subtle digs about my hobby, I set down my fork and looked him directly in the eye. "Jake, I need you to stop," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The table went quiet, fork suspended mid-bite. Jake's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Stop what, Clara? Being honest?" I took a deep breath. Stop dismissing my art. Stop treating me like I'm some naive child who doesn't understand the world. My work matters to me, and I'd appreciate some basic respect. Jake leaned back in his chair, a condescending smile spreading across his face. Respect is earned, Clara. Show me something worth respecting. The words stung, but what hurt more was the silence from everyone else at the table. No one defended me. No one told Jake he was out of line. They just sat there, uncomfortable witnesses to my humiliation. I excused myself early that night, driving home with tears blurring my vision and Jake's laughter echoing in my ears. The confrontation with Jake shattered something fundamental in me. For the first time since high school, I couldn't bring myself to pick up a paintbrush. My studio apartment felt like a museum of failed dreams. Every canvas a reminder of my foolishness. I started working extra shifts at the coffee shop, throwing myself into the mindless routine of grinding beans and steaming milk. At least there, no one expected me to create anything meaningful. My manager, Kevin, noticed the change immediately. "Where's that spark gone?" he asked one afternoon, watching me mechanically wipe down tables. I shrugged, unable to explain how Jake's words had poisoned the well of my creativity. Days blurred into weeks. I avoided family calls, made excuses to skip gatherings, and slowly felt myself disappearing into a gray fog of resignation. The easel by my window gathered dust, my paints dried up in their tubes. I was becoming exactly what Jake had always said I was. Nothing special, nothing worth celebrating. Just another dreamer who'd finally woken up to reality. 3 weeks into my artistic hibernation, an old friend from art school walked into the coffee shop. Madison looked radiant, confident, successful, everything I felt I wasn't. She ordered a latte and did a double take when she recognized me behind the counter. "Clara, oh my God, what are you doing here?" Her excitement was genuine, infectious. We talked during my break, and she told me about the gallery she'd opened downtown, how she was always looking for fresh talent to showcase. "You were one of the most gifted artists in our class," she said, stirring her drink thoughtfully. "Are you still painting?" I almost lied, almost told her I'd moved on to more practical pursuits. But something in her eyes, the same spark Mrs. Rodriguez had shown, made me hesitate. "I'm taking a break," I admitted. Madison's face fell. "Clara, you can't stop. Your work was incredible, emotional, raw, real. The art world needs voices like yours." She pulled out her phone and showed me photos from her latest exhibition. "Look at this," she said, swiping through images of vibrant, powerful pieces. "This could be you. This should be you." Madison's visit was like a defibrillator to my dormant dreams. That night, I stood in front of my dusty easel for the first time in weeks, my hands trembling as I reached for a brush. The first stroke felt foreign, awkward, but by the second and third, muscle memory kicked in. I painted until dawn, pouring months of frustration and hurt onto the canvas. When I finally stepped back, I saw something I'd never created before. A piece that captured not just beauty, but pain transformed into power. Over the next few days, I set a goal that terrified and excited me in equal measure. The annual Riverside Art Fair was 3 months away, and I was going to apply for a booth. I'd showcase a series of paintings that told my story. The struggle, the doubt, the journey toward self-acceptance. I called it Finding My Voice, and for the first time in years, I felt like I actually had one. I worked with an intensity I'd never experienced, each painting a chapter in my personal revolution. This wasn't just about proving Jake wrong anymore, it was about proving myself right. I made the mistake of sharing my excitement about the art fair during the next family dinner. The moment I mentioned it, Jake's fork clattered against his plate. "Oh, Clara," he said with that familiar, condescending tone, "you're not seriously going to embarrass yourself in public, are you?" The table fell silent again, all eyes on me. I felt my confidence wavering, but I pushed forward. "I think my work is ready," I said quietly. Jake laughed, actually laughed, shaking his head like I just told him I planned to become an astronaut. "Clara, selling finger paintings at a craft fair isn't a career. It's a hobby that got out of hand." He turned to address the whole table, his voice gaining momentum. "Someone needs to tell her the truth. She's 30 years old, living in a studio apartment, working at a coffee shop. When is she going to accept reality and get a real job?" The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to crush what little confidence I'd rebuilt. But this time, instead of shrinking away, I felt something different. A cold, determined anger that crystallized into unshakable resolve. That night marked the beginning of my real artistic journey. I threw myself into my work with an intensity that bordered on obsession, channeling every ounce of hurt and frustration into my paintings. Each brushstroke was an act of rebellion. Every color choice a declaration of independence from Jake's suffocating expectations. I painted my childhood dreams, my family's disappointment, the weight of constantly feeling not enough. But I also painted hope. Sunrise breaking through storm clouds, flowers growing through concrete, butterflies emerging from cocoons. The series grew from 5 paintings to 8, then 12. Each piece was more powerful than the last, more honest, more raw. I worked through the night, surviving on coffee and determination, my hands stained with paint, and my heart finally, fully alive. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped by again and gasped when she saw my progress. "Mia," she whispered, tears in her eyes, "this is your breakthrough. This is the work that will change everything." I was beginning to believe her, feeling a strength I'd never known I possessed building with each completed canvas. What I didn't know was that Emma had been watching my transformation from a distance. While Jake continued his campaign to bring me back to reality, my sister had been quietly observing the changes in me, the new confidence, the sense of purpose, the light returning to my eyes. One evening, she asked to see my work. I hesitated, still hurt by her earlier dismissal, but something in her voice made me agree. She stood in my studio for nearly an hour, moving from painting to painting in complete silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Clara, they're incredible. I had no idea." She pulled out her phone and, before I could protest, started taking photos. "I'm going to share these," she said firmly. "People need to see this." I watched in amazement as she posted my work on her social media accounts, writing captions that spoke about artistic courage and following dreams. Within hours, the responses started pouring in. Likes, comments, shares from people who connected with the emotional honesty of my paintings. Emma had given me something I'd never had before. A platform and a voice. The Riverside Art Fair arrived faster than I'd expected, and I spent the morning of setup with my stomach in knots. My booth was modest compared to some of the established artists around me, but my 12 paintings commanded attention. The Finding My Voice series created a visual narrative that drew people in, making them linger, making them feel. By noon, a small crowd had gathered, and I overheard snippets of conversation that made my heart soar. "Look at the emotion in this one," a woman said to her husband. "You can feel her journey." A teenager stood transfixed in front of my painting titled "Breaking Free," and when her mother tried to pull her away, she said, "Mom, this is exactly how I feel." Sales started slowly, then picked up momentum. But more than the money, it was the connections that mattered. People sharing their own stories of struggle and triumph, telling me how my work spoke to their experiences. By the end of the day, I'd sold 7 paintings and collected dozens of business cards from people wanting to commission work or follow my future exhibitions. Just as I was packing up my remaining pieces, a distinguished older woman approached my booth. She studied my work with the intense focus of someone who truly understood art, and I noticed other vendors glancing our way with respectful recognition. "Excuse me," she said finally, her voice carrying an authority that made me stand straighter. "I'm Helena Voss from the City Arts Review. I've been covering local artists for 20 years, and I have to say, your work is exceptional." My heart nearly stopped. Helena Voss was legendary in our city's art scene. Her reviews could make or break careers. She handed me her card and continued, "I'd like to feature your series in next month's review. Would you be interested in an interview?" I managed to stammer out a yes, my hands shaking as I took her card. As she walked away, I heard her tell her companion, "That young woman has something special. Mark my words, we'll be seeing a lot more of her work." I stood there in the fading afternoon light, holding her business card like it was made of gold, finally understanding that my dreams weren't foolish after all. The interview with Helena Voss was published 2 weeks later, accompanied by full-color photos of my paintings and a headline that made me cry. "Local artist finds her voice. Clara Martinez's powerful journey from self-doubt to self-discovery." The article was shared hundreds of times on social media, and suddenly my phone was buzzing with messages from strangers who'd been moved by my story. Emma called me, crying with excitement. "Clara, you're everywhere. The article is being shared by art blogs, galleries are calling. You did it!" But the most satisfying moment came when my cousin posted a screenshot of the article on the family group chat. The silence that followed was deafening. No congratulations from Jake, no acknowledgement of my success. Just uncomfortable quiet from the people who'd dismissed me for so long. I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. The art world was embracing me, and that was enough. Actually, it was more than enough. It was everything I'd ever dreamed of. Jake's reaction to my sudden recognition was as predictable as it was petty. At the next family gathering, he went on the offensive, telling anyone who would listen that my art was derivative and overhyped. He claimed that the local art scene was small time, and that real success meant something different entirely. But his words fell flat now. Other family members had seen the article, had witnessed the genuine enthusiasm of the art community, and they weren't buying his dismissal anymore. Uncle Harold actually defended me, saying, "Jake, the girl's getting real recognition. Maybe it's time to admit you were wrong." The shift in family dynamics was palpable. Where once Jake's opinions had carried weight, now they seemed petty and jealous. Emma stood firmly by my side, showing people the article on her phone and beaming with pride. I watched Jake's influence crumble, his credibility eroded by his own stubborn refusal to acknowledge what was becoming undeniable. I had talent, I had found my path, and I was succeeding on my own terms. Feeling emboldened by the positive response to Helena's article, I decided to try something that terrified me: a live art demonstration streamed online. Madison helped me set up the technical aspects, positioning cameras to capture both my face and my canvas as I worked. I'd never painted in front of an audience before, let alone shared my creative process with potentially thousands of strangers. But something about the moment felt right, like I was finally ready to be completely vulnerable about my art. I started the stream with just a few viewers, talking nervously about my inspiration while mixing colors on my palette. But as I began painting, a piece about transformation, about butterflies emerging from cocoons, the viewer count started climbing. 10 viewers became 50, then 100, then 500. Comments poured in from people around the world, sharing their own stories of overcoming doubt and finding courage. By the time I finished the painting 3 hours later, over 2,000 people had watched, and the recording was being shared across platforms. The livestream video exploded overnight, garnering hundreds of thousands of views across different social media platforms. I woke up to my phone buzzing non-stop with notifications, comments, shares, friend requests, and messages from people who'd been touched by my story. Art bloggers were writing about my authentic vulnerability, and galleries from neighboring cities were reaching out about potential exhibitions. The local news station called, wanting to do a feature story about my journey from coffee shop employee to rising art star. I felt like I was living in a dream, except it was better than any dream I'd ever had, because it was real. My confidence soared to heights I'd never experienced. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, truly valued for who I was and what I created. The girl who'd been dismissed as a dreamer was now being celebrated as an inspiration. But with the recognition came an unexpected consequence. Jake's jealousy reached a boiling point. The family was splitting into 2 camps, and the division was becoming impossible to ignore. On one side were those who celebrated my success: Emma, my parents, several aunts and uncles who'd started following my work and sharing it with their friends. On the other side was Jake, increasingly isolated but still vocal in his criticism, now claiming that my sudden fame was flash in the pan and that I was getting too big for my britches. The tension came to a head during my cousin's graduation party, where Jake made a scene that shocked everyone. When someone mentioned my upcoming gallery showing, he exploded. "Enough!" he shouted, his face red with frustration. "Everyone's acting like Clara discovered fire. It's just paint on canvas." The room fell silent, but this time it wasn't because people agreed with him, it was because they were embarrassed by his outburst. My Aunt Patricia actually told him to calm down, and my uncle walked away shaking his head. Jake had overplayed his hand, revealing his jealousy so blatantly that even his supporters couldn't defend him anymore. The confrontation I'd been dreading finally came when Jake cornered me in Emma's kitchen during a family barbecue. His usual smugness had been replaced by something darker, a desperate anger that made my skin crawl. "This stops now," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You're embarrassing this family with all this attention-seeking nonsense. If you don't dial it back, if you don't stop this ridiculous charade, I'll make sure you're not welcome at family events anymore." I stared at him in disbelief. This man who'd spent years tearing me down was now trying to blackmail me into silence because I'd finally found success. But instead of the fear he expected to see, he found something that made him step back, calm, unshakable confidence. "Jake," I said quietly, my voice steady as steel, "you don't get to decide my worth anymore. You don't get to define my dreams or limit my potential, and you certainly don't get to threaten me." I walked away from him then, leaving him standing alone in that kitchen, finally understanding that his power over me was completely and permanently broken. The breakthrough I'd been hoping for came in the form of an email that made me read it 3 times before I believed it was real. Marcus Chen, a prominent art influencer with over 1 million followers, had seen my livestream and wanted to collaborate on a project highlighting emerging artists who'd overcome adversity. His message was warm and genuine, expressing admiration for both my artistic skill and my personal story. The collaboration would involve a joint exhibition, a documentary-style video about my journey, and exposure to his massive network of collectors and gallery owners. I called Madison immediately, barely able to contain my excitement. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with awe. "This is the opportunity that changes everything." As I sat in my studio that night, surrounded by paintings that had once seemed like impossible dreams, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the success, but for the journey itself. Every moment of doubt, every cruel word from Jake, every night I'd cried over my foolish dreams. All of it had led me here, to this moment of pure possibility. The collaboration with Marcus brought opportunities I'd never imagined, but it also created an unexpected rift with Emma. While she'd been supportive of my local success, the prospect of national attention seemed to overwhelm her. During what should have been a celebratory dinner, she broke down crying. "I'm proud of you," she sobbed, "but I'm also terrified. Jake is making our home life miserable. He's convinced that your success somehow diminishes him, and he's taking it out on me." I felt my heart break for my sister, caught between her husband's jealousy and her love for me. She revealed that Jake had been pressuring her to stop promoting my work, claiming that she was choosing her sister over her marriage. The weight of her confession settled over me like a heavy blanket. I'd gained the world's recognition, but I was losing my sister to her husband's insecurities. That night, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Emma and told her that if Jake couldn't handle my success, maybe it was time for our family to have an honest conversation about respect and support. I decided to host a family meeting at my parents' house, neutral ground where everyone could speak freely. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut as family members filed in, taking sides before anyone had even spoken. I stood in front of the fireplace, my heart pounding but my resolve absolute. "I called everyone here because our family is breaking apart," I began, my voice clear and strong. "Jake, for years you've dismissed my dreams, belittled my work, and tried to convince everyone that I was wasting my life. You made me feel small, worthless, like my passions didn't matter." I turned to address the whole room. "But I want everyone to understand something. My success isn't about proving Jake wrong. It's about proving myself right. It's about showing that dreams are worth pursuing, that passion has value, that being different doesn't mean being wrong." Jake tried to interrupt, but my father, quiet, gentle dad, held up his hand and told him to let me finish. "I'm not asking for an apology," I continued. "I'm asking for respect. And if you can't give me that, then maybe we need to reconsider what family means to all of us." The gallery opening for my collaboration with Marcus was everything I dreamed of and more. The space was packed with art lovers, collectors, journalists, and fellow artists, all there to celebrate not just my work, but the stories of resilience that each painting represented. My parents stood by my side, beaming with pride as strangers approached to congratulate them on raising such a talented daughter. Emma was there too, having finally found the courage to attend despite Jake's protests. But the most surprising attendee was Jake himself, standing awkwardly near the entrance, clearly uncomfortable but unable to stay away. As the evening progressed, I watched him observe the genuine enthusiasm of the crowd, the serious discussions about my artistic technique, the impressive sales figures that Madison whispered to me throughout the night. For the first time, he was seeing my success not through the lens of family dynamics, but through the eyes of the art world. And it was undeniable. When Helena Voss approached him to ask about his relationship to the artist, I saw something I'd never seen before in Jake's face: genuine respect, mixed with what might have been regret. The confrontation I'd been expecting came not from Jake, but from several family members who'd finally had enough of his behavior. As I stood near my centerpiece painting, a large canvas titled Rising, I overheard Uncle Harold telling Jake exactly what he thought of his years of discouragement. "You've been wrong about Clara from the beginning," he said firmly. "Instead of supporting her, you tried to tear her down. Look around, Jake. Look at what she's accomplished despite your negativity." Aunt Patricia joined in, her voice sharp with disapproval. "I remember every family dinner where you made that girl feel small. We all just sat there and let it happen, and I'm ashamed of that." Other family members nodded in agreement, sharing their own memories of Jake's cruelty and their regret at not speaking up sooner. Jake stood there, isolated and defensive, finally experiencing the judgment he'd so freely dispensed for years. But as I watched this reckoning unfold, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, but sadness. This wasn't the victory I'd imagined. Revenge felt hollow when what I really wanted was healing. As the gallery opening wound down and the last guests filtered out, I found myself standing alone with my paintings, reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought me here. The girl who'd once cowered under Jake's criticism was now a recognized artist with a growing reputation and a bright future ahead. But more importantly, I'd discovered something invaluable about myself: that my worth wasn't determined by others' opinions, that my dreams had power precisely because they were mine. Jake approached me hesitantly as I was preparing to leave, his usual arrogance replaced by something that looked like humility. "Clara," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong. About your art, about your potential, about everything." I studied his face, seeing genuine remorse for perhaps the first time. "I appreciate that, Jake," I replied, "but the apology I needed most was the one I gave myself: permission to believe in my dreams, regardless of what anyone else thought." As I walked out of the gallery that night, surrounded by family members who now saw me clearly, I felt a profound sense of completion. I'd risen above the ridicule, transformed my pain into power, and proved that sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to let others define your worth.